Everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by. This is our weekly Wednesday night live stream. Hope you're all doing well. I see Samantha Sider already with the super chat. Thank you for the support, Samantha, as always. Always leading off with that. Can't wait to see Nina become the newest squad member. Me too. She's gonna have to probably fight a very tough primary, but I'm optimistic that she's going to give it her very best, and we'll be talking about that tonight. Some comments here. I saw some comments about people suggesting that Trump did indeed win the election. That's not true. It's not. The election's over. Trump lost. I know he continues to insist otherwise, but he has lost. We'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, look, right off the top, we can go to that. Let's start with that a little bit. So, basically, Donald Trump has suggested that, of course, he won the election. It's not true. He's also suggested that all of these factors sort of prove he couldn't have lost. But none of them are actual factual points. They're just sort of coincidences in history that don't necessarily apply in any particular case. So one of the arguments Trump made, and you're going to see this a lot, and it's actually factually incorrect, is Trump has been saying for weeks, and in a formal document Trump sent to the Supreme Court, not just ramblings on Twitter, he said, fundamentally, I think we're still good. He said, nobody who has won both Ohio and Florida has lost the election. And so what Trump is trying to imply there is saying, look, I won Ohio and I won Florida, and then neither were actually that close. So it's impossible for me to have lost this election. Because if I win those two, it's over. Like, that's the argument Trump is making. But the problem with that is that, countries change. The United States changes, right? The United States changes. And what states are paired to one another? What states are swing states? Which states matter in that way? Change over time. But further to that, you only have to go back to 1960 to prove Trump wrong. If you go to 1960, let me see if I can maybe throw this up on the... If I could throw this up here. Let me see. Images. Yeah. So if you throw this, I can throw this up on the screen maybe. And we'll get a good sense here. Let me pop this out here. Okay. So, going back to 1960, let me open up my window capture. You can see very clearly that Trump lost. Yep, one second. Yeah. You see very clearly that Trump lost in 1960 here. You can see that, right? You can 100% see that. Or, excuse me, in 1960, the winning candidate got a victory, which was Kennedy, over Nixon. It was very close. This was a very close election, to be fair. Didn't end up being all that close in the math, but in the actual electoral college, but it was actually quite a close election. And so a lot of people on election night, they thought Nixon was going to win. And if you look here, Nixon wins both Ohio and Florida. Now, because this is 1960, you can see that Ohio actually is one of the larger states for votes, right? You can see here that Ohio has 25 electoral college votes, which makes it like, what is that? Like the third or fourth biggest state in the country in terms of vote. It's a massive state at the time. But the point is, there have been elections where the losing candidate does not win both Florida and Ohio, right? That's the simple truth. And so one of the arguments Trump is making is, I've won all these particular ways. I've won all these states. I've won all these battlegrounds. So there's no way I could have lost. But it's not true, right? Like, Trump is also arguing, and I think I saw some comments maybe before we started. It cut. I think they were cut off, but I did see some comments where somebody suggested, hey, Trump won 18 of the 19 bellwether counties that are often considered like the counties that best represent a path to victory, right? And Trump won most of those counties, apparently. But the point is, this wasn't a normal election in a lot of ways. Turnout was significantly higher. As a percentage, this was one of the highest turnout elections in the last 100 years. Like, in raw votes, but also percentage of turnout, people voted en masse everywhere. There was very high turnout. Young people came out. Lots of people came out. You also saw a shift away from a traditional, strength within the Republican suburbs. This election was much more the case that educated white people voted for Joe Biden. It used to be that if you were white and educated, not with like a PhD educated, academics voted Democrat, but like if you had a bachelor's degree and you were white, you were far more likely to vote Republican. And over time, that changed. Over time, education became more of a proxy of progressivism, at least within the narrow confines of, red versus blue. I know the majority of the Democratic Party is not progressive. We all know this, but people who have educations tend to vote Democrat. And so if Trump is a different sort of Republican candidate, and he's running at least in style, very differently from recent Republicans like Bush and McCain and Romney, it's potentially the case that he could win a lot of the traditional things Republicans often do, but lose other things that matter. Right? That Trump can, yes, win Florida and win Ohio, which generally, yes, means the election's over. If you win both, it's over. But because of his legendary unpopularity with certain groups in certain places, winning Florida because of a stronger than usual performance among Cubans, and winning a Ohio that's becoming more and more gradually red, and he's got real strength there in rural Ohio. Like, it's offset by the fact that he's lost Arizona. It's offset by the fact that he lost Nevada. It's offset by the fact that he lost Georgia, of course. It's offset by the fact that he gave back those three more traditionally blue Rust Belt states. Two of them by very significant margins, Michigan and Pennsylvania. And so it makes sense that Trump could win a lot of the traditional things, right? Right? Like, but lose in different ways that traditional political, like mapping doesn't reflect. Because, and this is one of the arguments here. Yeah. I think you mean opposed to integration, Joseph, I think, right? But the point is, the point is that all of these arguments about Trump, he's too I want all these counties you're supposed to win. I want all these things you're supposed to win. There's no other way that I could have lost this election because I won all the things you're supposed to win. It's not how this works. Trump lost the election. 100%. He lost the election. Some people are saying give this post a thumbs up. If you click the like button, leave a comment, participate in the chat, all those things help to get more people watching the stream. So I'd very much appreciate that. Yeah, people asking in that 1960 election who Byrd was. There was a protest in 1960 against the Democratic Party, which was becoming increasingly pro civil liberties for black people and rights for black people. And I know, look, Kennedy and LBJ were not true anti-racists, but they did, in a limited sense, support elements of civil rights. And so, because of that, a lot of Southern Democrats that didn't like the Republican Party because of, historical ties to the Civil War, but also did not like this new emerging type of Democratic Party, cast protest votes for, neither. And in some states, that was enough to actually win the state, which is why those are some really rare elections where a non-Democrat or a non-Republican wins a state. I think that might have been one of the last times. Because in 1964, all the states go to one of the two parties. That's a blowout win by LBJ over Barry Goldwater. Just absolutely blows him out. But Goldwater starts to signal the shift in the conservative movement, which wins Arizona, again, at the time, a very conservative state, as well as states like Louisiana and Georgia and South Carolina and the deep South, but not Florida, right? He wins the deep South. And then in 68, you get a similar thing where Nixon wins, but the South does vote, gives 5 states to George Wallace, who kind of ran again on a segregationist platform. But Nixon was able largely to consolidate the Christian right and the segregationist right in his movement, based largely off an opposition to the to the civil rights movement. And in 1972, he absolutely blows out George McGovern. In 76, Carter does win most of the South because he is from the South, and it was a special election following Watergate. But I mean, after Carter's victory, you have Carter winning Georgia when Nixon blows him out, but that's his home state. In 84, the entire South goes red. 88, the entire South goes red. 92, Clinton does win some of it, but in 96, he wins a little bit of it, but most of it goes red. And then, the South stays sharp red for much of the remainder of history. My name is Hello. Hello says hi from Berlin. Hey, hello. Hello. Thanks for stopping by again. And thanks for being a member of the channel, of course. So basically, that's my long way of saying that, just because you could carve out a pattern before doesn't mean the pattern has to hold all the time. I'm sure that going back to 1950, there was a saying in 1950 or the 1952 election, they could say, no one has ever won the presidency if they lose both Texas and Louisiana. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just saying hypothetically. And then somebody would eventually do it, and then that rule no longer applies. Yeah, a lot, when you see for the most part, a lot of these Southern candidates go that get significant third-party support, what they're doing is they're running as quasi-Dixiecrats, basically. And a Dixiecrat was a Democrat federally right? They ran as federal Democrats, but did not support civil rights for African Americans or integration, shared schools, shared public pools, shared restaurants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't support those things. And so again, they weren't Republicans because the Republican Party didn't really exist in the South. The South was basically a quasi one-party state, both federally and often at the state level as well. And so basically, when you see that, what you're seeing is the segregationist wings of the Democratic Party not voting with the Democrats, and that's what's happening, right? And sometimes they play spoiler, but sometimes they do so well they win the whole state, and like that has happened. So even like 1960, that happens where they win a couple states. And they also get one electoral college vote in Oklahoma. But in 1956, they get like a one electoral college vote. Before that, every once in a while, you would get something like Strom Thurmond, who Joe Biden praised and lived to a very old age. He won 4 states in 1948. It didn't end up mattering. The election wasn't all that close. But he won, I think, Louisiana and South Carolina, and I think Alabama, and one other state. And then if you look even to 44, like that's like the last FDR election. Before that, you would get these weird little things. Like, for instance, in 1924, Robert La Follette would win Minnesota. Wisconsin. Robert La Follette was I believe, a governor of that state, and he ran the Progressive Party, and he got in that election 17% of the vote and ended up winning one state. And that was the last time that a third-party candidate on the left get has done well enough to win a state. Betty's Mush asks, explain why little states get majority of the votes. I believe that because of when the Electoral College wasn't made law. Okay, so I'm not an American historian. I am a PhD trained historian, but mostly in Canada. But I have a general understanding here. Basically, at the time, there was a debate about how to pick the president of the United States, right? And some people wanted one person, one vote all the way back in 1776. Every white, at the time, it would be white property-owning man, usually 21 and older, so nowhere near a majority of the population, but like who they considered citizens, would get a vote, and you would add up the however many million votes there were, a few at the time, and then the winner would be president. And then the way they did it back then, which was very weird, was the second place person became vice president. There was no actual vice presidential slot on the ticket for a while, right? It was a while until they added that, like the 1800s. So basically, the smaller states were like, we don't like that because we feel we're going to be dominated by like New York and Virginia, which were among the 2 bigger states. And they worried about that. This is one of the reasons why the Senate is structured as it is, right? The Senate is structured as it is because when the country was formed, the belief was every state, the House should represent more or less the population. The Senate should represent the states, because some people back in the early days of the United States envisioned the United States less as one country and more as a European Union almost, or maybe something in between the two. Like, some people wanted like an EU style system or a quasi hybrid between a one country model and like a continental federation, like a United States. Each one was a separate nation state in a sense of America. And there was going to be originally 13 of them, and then they started adding more. But of course, what ended up happening was the U.S. more or less became a country, decentralized in a lot of ways, kind of like Canada. It's like a federation, but, you know, a pretty clearly a country, like with states in it, with provinces or states or sub-jurisdictions. And so the compromise was every state gets a minimum of 3 electoral college votes, because you get, for the amount of people that represent your state in the Congress. And I believe because every state is guaranteed at least one member of Congress, and every state is guaranteed 2 senators, they get 3 votes minimum, which is why you see so many of the smallest states, they all have exactly 3. States that are slightly bigger might get 4 or 5, but you will never go below 3, no matter what. And because the college is capped at, I don't even know what the total number is, but you know, it takes 270 to win, 5 something. Because the college doesn't grow, the bigger states will always be underrepresented. Because if the smallest states always get a minimum of 3, then the math has to be fixed somewhere else. So invariably, Florida, Texas, California, New York, those states are underrepresented relative to their populations. And actually, Texas is very underrepresented right now, some ways, because it's a very fast-growing state, and states that grow quickly are often underrepresented because the Electoral College only gets reapportioned, I think, every 10 years based on the 538, exactly, thank you. Why didn't I get that? Because of the website, right? But 538, exactly, thank you guys. But that number doesn't change, right? That number doesn't change, I don't believe, unless they add new states, maybe. Yeah, if you add new states, I think you do get more votes. I think that's how it works. Like when they added some of the new states, they added new votes. And so it's been at 538, I think, since the 1960s, and it hasn't changed. Even though the country has grown by like dozens, if not 100 million people since then, right? And so basically then, like what happens though, is that the smaller states get a fundamental advantage. But it also goes back to slavery. A lot of people were noting it here. But the Electoral College goes back to slavery in some ways. Right? Yeah, the college has grown since 19... I believe it's a little bit later than that, Firestar, because it grew when they added... Alaska and Florida as state. It's not Florida, Hawaii as states. And so basically, what happened is the states that had smaller populations of white people, but relatively large populations of black people, who most of whom were slaves, felt that one person, one vote would screw them over. Because they had a lot of human beings in their state, but many of them were black. And of course, because they were slaves, they couldn't vote. And even if they were free in many cases, they sometimes couldn't vote. Like it was like only white men could vote. Even if a black person was not a slave, they may not have basic rights like voting. And so the argument was, okay, we want some way to balance this. One person, one vote doesn't work for us. The Electoral College, though, allows us to create mathematical balances that give us an easy way of converting our votes to one national standard. And so what they did was they created an Electoral College. They balanced the population. But what they said was that slaves would count as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of boundary allocation for the House and the presidency. So to determine, okay, we have this many seats in the House, how many does each state get, and where do the districts go within each state, slaves were counted for 60% of a person. For every slave, you get 0.6. For every actual person, quote unquote, in the parlance of the 1700s, you get a full one, type thing like that. And so that gave increased value to the slaveholding states. States like Pennsylvania or New York, a lot of the northern states, some of them had basically already abolished slavery or were in the process of doing so. So they had a few 100,000 at most, sometimes only a few dozen thousand or less. It didn't matter to them, but there were some southern states where it was 40% of the population were slaves. And so of course it benefited them. Of course it benefited them. And that was a major factor, right? That was a huge factor. And so, in essence, the debate really did come down to, like, that sort of balance. And now, the argument ever since has been, you want to balance the big states having an actual weight to what they vote for, because so many people live there, and giving the smaller states a bit of an increased edge. Now, I've heard a lot of arguments about this. But, one of the arguments is that the smaller states will be ignored if there's no electoral college. But I don't buy that, guys. I don't buy that. Because most of the states get ignored now anyway. Most states get ignored now. How many states get attention, like, during an election? Like, Pennsylvania, Florida, Wisconsin, Michigan, and there are some others, of course, but really, Florida, like, look how much time Trump spent in Florida and Pennsylvania. Same thing with Biden. I know Biden did a more socially distanced campaign. Right? Like, I don't know. And so the argument is that, it will hurt people, the smaller states. But I say I don't buy it. I actually think that banishing the Electoral College is the best way to give conservatives and liberals and everybody, like Democrats and Republicans, more power. Because if you're a Republican in California, you are treated as meaningless in a Senate election or in a presidential election and in most House races, unless you live in very particular parts of the state where Republicans can compete. There are still hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Republicans that live in, like, LA, San Francisco, those sorts of cities. They live there. There's a lot of them that are loyal Republicans, and no one ever gives a damn about them. Because why would you? Why would you care? Math's not there. You could win those votes, but it's irrelevant. Why would you care? If it was one person, one vote, however, you would care. Republicans would actually work to win the votes of conservatives that live outside of a few counties in a few states. And conversely, progressive parties would see increased value in campaigning for blue voters in red states. Because if you go to a state like Alabama or Mississippi or Louisiana, there are significant amounts of Democratic voters, whether we're talking about African Americans, whether we're talking about college towns, whether we're talking about, the sort of types of Democratic voters that exist in the blue states. There's less of them, but, urban centers where a lot of Democratic voters tend to live, and there are urban centers even within a lot of these red states, they get utterly ignored as well. Right? So I think the best way for everyone's voice to be heard would be one person, one vote. Well, Samantha, I would agree that the Senate is more distortionary than the Electoral College, because the Electoral College is distortionary. Like, the Electoral College, you can win the Electoral College and lose the popular vote. But again, the reality is that at least, like, yeah, North Dakotans and South Dakotans and Vermonters and Hawaiians all get way more representation for president than when it comes to Floridians or Texans or New Yorkers or Californians. Like, we know this. But still, you know, those states all get 30, 40, 50 Electoral College votes. So, you know, at the very least, you can say, yeah, the small states get a lot of weight, but the big states still get raw heft behind them. With the Senate, you don't get that, right? The Senate is 2 no matter how big, no matter how small, and the bigger the gap between the biggest and small states get, the bigger the challenge. Now, one of the problems with this, of course, is like changing it. I see, in a sense, I think the Senate is worse, but more defensible. To me, the Electoral College is very clearly rooted in slavery, and it's abhorrent. Like, that's one of the reasons it was created, to give an easy way to do a calculation for slavery purposes. Because you couldn't, like, how else were you going to do it? Were you going to give the owners a vote, and then everyone gets a 0.6 vote, and how do you count that? How do you mathematically do 0.6 votes easily? It's weird. So what they decided to do was, we give the state a value based on its free people plus its slave people times 0.6, and that's the population, there's the weight. So the Electoral College mathematically was sort of needed to deal with the question of the 3/5 compromise. Whereas I understand the point of the Senate. I do get it. I still ultimately think it's undemocratic, and I think it should go, but I get the point of the Senate, which is that one body exists to represent the states. And if your vision of the country was that the states were quasi-independent from the federal government, then big and small and in between, one of the 3 branches should be equally responsive to all of them. I get that. Now, that's not how the country grew and developed, and the gap between the biggest and the smallest states is absolutely is gargantuan now. And I don't know if I don't know if it can I don't know if it can hold up to scrutiny. Like, I don't know if, like, it can hold up to scrutiny in the way it did at the beginning. Like, if we go to, like, if you go back to if you go back to the 1790s, right? If you go back to the 1790s, the smallest state, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, if you go back, the smallest state, I believe, was Delaware, with about 59,000. About 59,000 people lived in Delaware. Or, yeah, if you go back to the earliest days of the Republic in 1790, Tennessee was not admitted until 1796. So a lot of these really early states, the smallest was Delaware. The biggest in 1790 was Virginia, which had yet to be divided into Virginia and West Virginia, and it had 691,000. So pulling out my calculator, That's about 11.71 times bigger, right? That means at the time, the gap between the biggest state and the smallest state was about 11, 12 times. Today, that's not the case. Today, that's not the case. Right now, the smallest states have in and around 500,000 people or so, but California has like 30 million. So it's more like 36. Like, well, let me see. What biggest versus smallest state? Okay. So this is a fairly recent estimate. California has 39 million people, and the smallest state has 586 million people. So basically, like that's a massive gap, right? That's a massive gap. It's almost, it's like, it's well over 50 times. Well over 50 times. Oh, in terms of population? Yeah, it's in terms of population. Oh, 586,000. Samantha, 586,000, not million. Gritbuster says, how about a constitutional amendment to force the Senate to bring all legislation passed by the House to the floor as its highest priority? I mean, that's an interesting one. But, I don't know. I think, guys, a constitutional amendment right now, it's I don't know if you're going to be able to really get many of them done. That's the issue. Like, that's why I think the Senate is worse, but it's harder to fix. Because anything to do with disempowering the Senate, right? Anything to do with disempowering the Senate requires the smaller states that are held up by the Senate to give up power. And you need, like, was it 2/3 of the states, basically, I think? What is it, 2/3 of the states to vote for a constitutional amendment? Which is unlikely if so many of the states are on the smaller side. Right? So even if you could get beyond the ideology, even if you could just gather together California, Florida, Texas, New York, the two biggest red and the two biggest blue states, and get them to agree that the Senate has too much power and it gives too much power to the smaller states, you would have to convince the smaller states to relinquish that power. And I don't know if they will. Right? So, you know, we don't have that power. Like, they won't give that power. I think the realistic thing you can achieve is the national Interstate Popular Vote Compact. I don't know what the acronym is. People could tell me. But basically, 3/4 of the state. Geez, it's even worse. Jesus, guys. Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So, the changes you could hypothetically get done, and I'm not saying you will, especially given how close the Senate is right now, but the changes you can do include, one, at the state level, getting enough states to agree to apportion their vote based on the national popular vote. And so there are a group of states, most of them bluish, but not all of them, who have signed a pledge that when those states together get to, when those states together add up to 270 electoral college votes, they will all pledge in the next presidential election after that point to vote their electoral college votes not based on how their state voted, but on how the country voted. And states have a right to do that. States can say at the onset of the election, the winner of the national popular vote will win every delegate to the electoral college from the state of California. So if Donald Trump beats Joe in 2024, say they implement this and Trump beats Biden and he wins the popular vote, they will allocate all of their electoral college votes to the winner of the popular vote. And once you get to 270, then in effect, the electoral college is done. Like, if that agreement holds, the electoral college has been made pointless, right? Because if you can say get, 270 electoral college votes worth, or even a few more to give you a buffer, and then say to people, it doesn't matter now if you win Florida or Pennsylvania in particular, because enough states have said, as long as you win the popular vote, we're going to give the election to the winner of that election, right? To the winner of that popular vote, right? I don't think it's unconstitutional, my name is Hello, because states have the right to allocate votes as they choose. Going historically, some states did not allow their citizens to vote for president. They allocated their electoral college votes based on the vote of state legislatures, right? There is no rule specifically saying how states have to allocate their electoral college votes. So, for instance, a state could say, beyond this, they could say, like for instance, some states give out their votes by district. Like that's why Joe Biden was able to get a single vote in Nebraska. Because Nebraska says if you win a district, you get a vote. Maine has a similar thing, where one of Maine's votes is district-based. And so for most states, they've chosen you winner take all, whether you win by one vote or you win by 10 million votes, you get the whole shebang. But states could proportion their electoral college by proportionality. They could, for instance, say, look, we have 10 delegates. You got 60% of the vote. You get 6. Your opponent gets 4. They could do that. Or they could choose to follow the national popular vote. That right there is the way to do it. Now, certain states might not agree. In general, though, states have the right to allocate their vote. And as the Supreme Court has recently ruled, and that was basically a near unanimous, I believe it was unanimous, conservatives and liberals agreed that states have a right to force their electoral college people to vote a certain way. They have a right to punish and force votes. Not all states do, but faithless electors are not necessarily protected by the Constitution. So states have a right to say, here's how we're going to do it. Popular vote of the country determines who wins us. That you can do without an electoral college. That you can do without it. No, the electoral college exists, Nathan Thorpe, to uphold slavery. That's what it was created for. That it still exists is irrelevant. It was created to give voice to the slave-owning classes and the slave-owning states. That's why it exists. That's why it exists. The Senate exists. The Senate exists to give voice and vote to the smaller states. That's why the Senate exists, not the Electoral College. That exists for slaves. That's what exists. So that's achievable. I'm not saying it will happen, but that's achievable. You're not going to get a constitutional amendment done. You're not, especially on something like that. Likewise, that's why I think if the Democrats can somehow find a way to win a bit of a buffer in the Senate, win 52, 53 senators, maybe 54, which was maybe the hope this election, that they could pass DC statehood, and if Puerto Rico wants it, because there's a debate in Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican statehood. Those are changes you can do. You can also expand the Supreme Court, which should happen. It should be at least 13, because there should be one Supreme Court justice for every circuit court circuit, and there are 13 of them. These are all changes that you can do with a simple law. You just need a majority of the House and a majority of the Senate and the signature of the president. You know, like naming a national park bird is no harder than adding a new state. They are both equally just one vote. Simple as that. Well, Wingman, that's not quite the case with the Electoral College. I get your point. Wingman says the Electoral College originally existed to keep power in the elites and quash popular uprisings. That's to some degree, but that was what the Senate was created for especially. The Senate was created because the House was meant to represent the rabble. And by that, they meant property-owning white men. But it was meant to represent, like, the small property owner. The Senate was meant to be a 6-year body so that people weren't having to constantly rerun for election. Like, they wouldn't have to worry about it day to day as much. But many states didn't allow their citizens to vote for Senate. So most states allowed you to vote for your House of Representatives. But Senate elections did not become universal in the U.S. until the early 1900s. Right? So let me look this up to get some data. So the 17th Amendment to the Constitution says here, the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution established the direct election of United States senators in each state. The amendment supersedes Article 1, Section 3, Clauses 1 and 2 of the Constitution, under which senators were elected by state legislatures. It also alters the procedure for filling vacancies in the Senate, allowing for state legislatures to permit their governors to make temporary appointments until a special election can be held. The amendment was proposed in 1912 and became part of the Constitution in 1913. And it began in earnest in 1914. And then by 1919, all senators were chosen via elected method. If you go historically, not all states, right? Not all states allowed the vote of the Senate, right? So that's basically it. That's why the Senate existed. So basically the argument for the Senate was, not only is it, two per state to give each state equal weight, and not only is it 6-year terms, the idea was that the filibuster would be allowed in the Senate, so there could be unlimited debate potentially. Of course, it's been abused, so that they would never rush in the Senate. And the whole argument, hypothetically, was, we want a body of deliberation by elite gentlemen who are only going to be selected by their own legislatures. So, if you're a regular white man and you have your property qualifications and all those other things you need to vote, you go and vote, and you can vote for president in most cases, and you can vote for Congress, and you elect your local officials, but then those local officials are the ones that pick your senators. And so that was the point of the Senate. In Canada, a similar argument was made, but here our Senate is not elected, and it never has been. Our Senate is mostly ceremonial, but one of the arguments made for it was that the rich were the most endangered minority. They actually, Canada's first prime minister basically said that, saying there's no minority more imperiled than the wealthy, and they need a body to protect themselves from the regular classes of people. And so the House of Commons is dominated by one man, one vote, or by, a system of democratic elections. But the Senate is where the prime minister and his cabinet can appoint people to serve. In Canada, the rule is you serve indefinitely in the Senate until the age of 75, upon which you retire. So if you get appointed to the Senate and you're in your 30s, you are in the Senate no matter what, basically, until you retire. It's almost impossible to remove someone from the Canadian Senate. So that's why the Senate exists. That's why. That's why. I did see a good question here. Let me see. Super chat. Sorry to Surf Appington. I wanted to get to that, but I just wanted to kind of stay on that note. He says, is there any conspiracy theories you believe in? I mean, this is an interesting question, right? Okay, let me see. I saw something on Twitter months ago now, probably before the actual vote, where it was like a pyramid of conspiracy theories. And at the top of let me see if he... Let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find this, because I want to... Okay, is this it right here? Yeah, okay. This is it right here. Let me see if I can bring this up here. Okay, it's really hard to see. Let me see if I can... And so basically, I think it's actually... I think it's actually pretty good. I'm kind of getting some of the conspiracies that I thought were pretty true. Okay, I can't seem to find it right now. But basically, there were, at the bottom of the pyramid, or at the top of the pyramid, the kind of way it worked out was that you had absolutely bonkers conspiracy theories, like QAnon, things like that. Things like that. But then there are conspiracies that I believe. Like, for instance, now, most of you, I'm going to guess, whether you're a Trump supporter, because I know a few people are here that are Trump supporters, or you're a lefty like me, Epstein did not kill himself. Technically, guys, that's probably a conspiracy theory, but I 100% have no doubt in my mind that Epstein, he did not kill himself. There's no way. There's no way Epstein killed himself. There's no way. The man was killed. I don't know who did it. Like, I always see Trump supporters, and they're like, oh, Clinton, Hillary, and Bill got to Epstein. But I'm like, yeah, maybe. But, like, Trump has just as much motive to do Epstein in than the Clintons. I mean, so does the royal family of Britain, to be fair. Right? So does the English royal family. Like, Epstein did not commit suicide. That's like, if I have like a conspiracy theory that I believe, that's one of them. I've seen no argument like that's convincing to me. So that's like a conspiracy I believe in. Other things like Samantha says, like technically it's a conspiracy that all the Dems dropped out to endorse Biden at the same time, but there's this overwhelming evidence of it. Just because it's a conspiracy doesn't mean it's an insane theory. Yeah, that's another thing where a lot of like Biden supporters, Obama types will say, oh, you're just creating this imagined conspiracy against Bernie, when I think very clearly, like, yeah, there was clearly an 11th hour like gathering of the neoliberals to stop Bernie. Yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable. And there has been some reporting that doesn't come out and exactly say it like that, but it basically implies that, right? That like the Democrats came out and absolutely united at the final moment to stop Bernie. Like that's definitely a thing that was like that. That's definitely a thing that happened. 100%. 100%. That's a thing that happened. Without a doubt. Well, yeah, that's a good point, JTVJ. Maybe that's a better way of putting it, honestly. They conspired, but it's not a conspiracy theory. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. Okay. Do people think... Okay, what do people think about Epstein? Because, yeah, like, look, the info he had was just horrific stuff that he did or allowed people to do or whatever. The people on his lists include Trump and Clinton and Prince Andrew. And it's like, you're telling me, like that happened. NJ says JFK covered up the JFK assassination, not because the CIA mob was involved, but because they feared the Soviets were, probably thought trigger war. Still Oswald probably did it. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not versed on like the deep lore of the Kennedy story. So honestly, I'm ambivalent on like what happened and like what the motives were with Kennedy. I'm just going to grab some water. I'll be right back. But that's probably one, honestly, that like if I ended up finding out that either like you say, maybe Oswald did it, but the motive was not made clear, or the motive was distorted, I wouldn't be shocked. It wouldn't rock my worldview that like they lied about there were lies about the Kennedy assassination. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to play this video for you guys. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit. I almost did a video on this today, but my son was home today. He's fine. He was just a little under the weather. No COVID or anything like that. Don't worry, guys. But my son was home today, so I was on dad duty for most of the day. So I didn't have as much time, and I haven't over the last couple days to make my videos. So what happened basically was Bernie went on MSNBC to talk about the need for a universal $1,200 stimulus check, right? Like we got to get cash to the people. Like me and other senators like Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren and Ron Wyden, we all agree. Even Josh Hawley, a Republican, thinks that like, look, we can debate about the specifics on other things, but like, we need to give money to people. Bernie went on the network, and Stephanie Ruhle, who's like this like capitalist elite ghoul on MSNBC, like tried to make this about how Bernie hasn't passed a lot of legislation, and like it clearly wasn't an off the cuff thing. And I'll show you a little clip from it. Let me get this up here, and I'll show it for you. Let me pop this out here. Bring this. Let me exit full screen, because I want to talk a bit about this a little bit, and obviously why it's bullshit, and obviously like that it was not an accident. Yeah, and also he did do. Yeah, Dan, you're right, but Bernie's like, we got to get something to people. I'm sure Bernie would be willing to play some sort of ball on this. Like if he couldn't get $2,000, he'd take 12. But Bernie is saying a red line is the people need something. Like Bernie's not being unreasonable. And so what Doug Grinberg says that Bernie was on TYT today. So do go check that out. Not until my stream is done though. Then go check out TYT. I'm sure they'll have like a video on it at some point. But let me put this. Let me get this right here. And so this is Stephanie Rule. Video capture. On MSNBC earlier today. Let me, actually, sorry, I know the volume's a little low. So you can look here, I'll play it again. So you can see what she did there, right? You can see what she did. So that's Stephanie Rule. And she is an MSNBC host, one of their daytime people. Not a huge name at the network, but she's not like a nobody either. And that was basically her trying to smear Bernie there. People catch why that was definitely on purpose. Oh, too loud. Okay. People said it was now too loud. Okay. I'm going to paraphrase that for you. Okay. Sorry about that. That's the audio quality on that one. Okay. So basically what she's saying is that, okay. Yeah. I don't know if I have a better clip on that one, guys. But basically what she's saying is, you want this $1,200 check, $2,000 check, whatever. But the argument from her was, don't you need to compromise? You've been in the Senate for all these years. Okay. I'm going to see if I can find another clip. Let me see.
Senator Bernie Sanders from the state of Vermont.
Okay, this one I think is better. Let me get this one out. Better quality, I think, too. So I'm going to play the whole clip for you here. And this is from a good friend of the channel, QBK Study. They have a YouTube channel. Do check them out. And they are really good at providing clips. I don't get all my clips from them, of course. But especially when it comes to, like, progressive things, I often get them from him.
Included in the next relief bill. Senator, we've heard your impassioned argument. Help us understand, how many other senators have you convinced to support these stimulus checks? Any Republicans on board?
Yes, I think there is one, but Senator Hawley indicates that he's supportive of a $1,200 per person direct payment and $600 or $500 for children. I think the Democratic caucus is ready to go forward on that. Yesterday I sent out a letter with 5 other senators, and I think we can have virtually all of the United States Democratic senators on board. The question now is whether or not Mitch McConnell is going to turn his back, as your report just indicated, on the incredible suffering that the American people, the working people, are now experiencing. Unemployment high. We have a record level of hunger in America. Millions of people are facing evictions. This is an emergency. Congress has got to respond aggressively to help working families. You know, Stephanie, I always get a kick. Here in Washington, when we go to war, there's endless amounts of money. Tax breaks for billionaires, endless amounts of money. Corporate welfare, endless amounts of money. When children are going hungry in America today, suddenly we don't have enough money. That's crap. That's wrong. And if we have got to stay here throughout Christmas, which is the last thing in the world that I would want to do, we're going to stay here because we are going to make sure that struggling working families in this country get the help they desperately need.
This is what you need to see here.
I'm not agreeing with you fundamentally.
This is what you need to see here. I wanted to get this put here.
Lead sponsor of 422 bills during your 30 years in Congress, but only 7 of them have become law. Given that record and how dire things are, as you just laid out, do you need to find another lane or take a different approach here?
I don't think that's the issue, Stephanie. I mean, you can ask me how many other senators have passed significant legislation in recent years.
So, guys, do you see what she did there, right? Okay. So you could see what she did there. You didn't need to see the first part of it. You didn't need to see that. But clearly what she did there was try to suggest that it's Bernie's fault that the rest of the United States government are a bunch of fucking ghouls. That it's Bernie's fault that the rest of the Senate and when he was in the House wouldn't vote for his legislation. And so what Bernie there is saying is very clear. Look, I have this very simple demand. I want every working class person to get some kind of stimulus. Right? I want every working class person to get that. I don't want the unemployment benefit cut from where it was last time. And I don't want to give corporations a get out of jail free card for killing their workers with COVID. Right? That's what Bernie wants. None of that is unreasonable. None of that is. And if you're a Republican or a Democrat that opposes that, you're being unreasonable. Right? Like, that's the reality. They're being unreasonable. And so then you have Stephanie Ruhle coming on in here. And at first she's trying to say, oh, do you even have one Republican? Do you even have one Republican that supports this legislation? Because it's like, oh, like Bernie is responsible for getting one Republican to support his basic human fucking decency. And then he's like, yes, I actually do have a Republican. I do have a Republican that supports this. Only one, to be fair, but I do have a Republican. Right? Right? And then she's like, at the end, she's like, well, you know, Bernie, just off the top of my head, I guess, aren't you like a totally ineffective legislator? And shouldn't you change your tactics here? Because you don't get very much passed. Right? Right? And it's like, what the fuck does that matter right now? One, that it's debatable at best that amount of bills passing equals legislative success. Because it matters what you're passing. Are we really gonna argue that, like, passing the Obama, the Bush era tax cut, whoever did that in the House and Senate was a productive legislator? I wouldn't. Like, you know what I mean? Like, cutting healthcare, cutting social insurance, or trying to, and getting bills through the Senate or the House based on that? I wouldn't support that. Right? Right? Like that's a key factor. It should also be noted that even beyond that, Bernie's often been noted as the amendment king. Like he's been known as like the guy to like get things passed in the House and in the Senate through amendments. And amendments really matter. Amendments can make a bill worse, of course, but they can often make it better. And Bernie has often been a leader on amendments, even just with COVID. Back in the original deal, the original package, which again had a lot of issues, 4 Republican senators threatened to hold up the bill because it gave some workers unemployment that meant they would make more on unemployment than they did at their jobs. Because God forbid that some of the poorest workers get a little bit of a bonus just this once. And so Tim Scott, Rick Scott, I think like, and a couple others were like, they were going to hold the bill back, right? They were going to hold the bill back. Fuck off with anti-vaxxing stuff. No, I'm not putting up with that. If I see anti-vaxxing stuff, mods, please delete. I'm not putting up with that. Like, I'm not trying to censor things here, but anti-vaccination talk, I'm not putting up with that bullshit. No, I'm not putting up with that. No. That's a warning to anybody that's doing anti-vaxxing stuff. Vaccinations are cool and good. Simple as that. Okay. So, on from that. Look, the reality is, like, fundamentally, like, Bernie has done a lot. And the argument that he hasn't done more only comes down to the fact that other senators and Congress people are fucking assholes. Right? Like, they're fucking assholes. Like honestly, right? Like, I don't know. That's my view. And like, let's remember who Stephanie Rule is. Do you guys remember? Let me see if I can. She was the one, guys. Do you remember this? She was the one that fundamentally was like, Joe Biden is a class warrior. Do you remember when Joe Biden said, this is an election between Main Street and Park Street? Or something like that, right? When he was basically saying Donald Trump is from the richest part of New York, like the richest part of the richest city in the country, and I'm from Scranton. And I know, like, that's overly simplistic, whatever. But like, that was Biden's rhetoric. And it was one of the few times where Biden actually leaned into progressive populism. And I think it was a good idea. Like, Biden's disingenuous, but it was a good idea. Right? Like, it was a good idea. Yeah, I'm probably getting brigaded at this point. I actually haven't checked the likes versus dislikes, but it would not surprise me. It happens every now and then when you do a stream. Because if people are looking for Trump content and they see my stream and it's not pro-Trump, then they're going to be angry. And not all Trumpers. There are some people who support Trump that watch my content and are good faith viewers. But for the most part, they see it, they're angry, they'll dislike it or whatever. But no, the point is, she was like, why does Joe Biden hate rich people? I live on Park Street. I live on these, like, I don't live there, but I live very, very close to there. And I work hard and I found success, but I just want everyone to have opportunity. And why does Joe Biden need to be attacking me? And there's this lady here who has connections to banking, lives in a mansion, makes millions a year off her media work and all these sorts of things, complaining about Joe effing Biden being too hard on the rich. Right? Joe Biden, for Stephanie Rule, was too much of a class warrior. That's who we're talking about here. Joe Biden. She was mad at him. So Yeah, this was like in a sense an ambush on Bernie, because as we noted there, do you notice that at the end of that clip, she comes out and she says, well, Bernie, like you haven't passed a lot of legislation, and so therefore maybe you need to rethink your strategy. And they had a graphic up there. And the reason they had the graphic, right, is because they knew that they were bringing Bernie on to talk about how working class people should not die. And she was like, oh no, that's not good enough. We got to make this about rationality. So actually, right here, I'm going to put a link in the description. This is the video I made on this. I made a video on this subject back when it happened. Geez, I don't even know when. When did that video come out? In mid-September, basically, where Stephanie Ruhle makes this whole big deal about how, like, Joe Biden is hurting the real victims, rich New Yorkers. Yeah, I mean, 5 million might not be that much in the grand scheme of things, but like, it's a lot of money. Even in the richest parts of New York, a net worth of 5 million is a lot of money. There's nowhere where 5 million is not a lot of money. And I mean, I'm not sure what her net worth is. Those sites can often be very, I don't even know if they're what data they're using, or if they're just publishing gossip. But like, you would think that she's actually quite well off. Stephanie Ruhle. Let me see. Stephanie Ruhle lives in like a mansion. She also has connections to banking and those sorts of things. Let me see. There's something here. Somebody, when I was talking about my stream tonight, somebody said, be sure to talk about this. So, Ben Lannister Theobald, I don't know if that Theobald Ben's watching, shared an article from the Washington Post where she did promotional spots for JP Morgan Chase, even though she covers some of those groups as a journalist. So while working as a journalist for MSNBC, she was doing ads. Hey, you going to bed? Okay, yeah. Bree says hi, everybody. Yeah. So she's like super in with the rich and wealthy and well-connected. Lives in a mansion, does schmoozy promo for banks, and then supposedly covers the news. Yeah. That was an ambush. They tried to ambush Bernie there. And then, like, David Dole did a really good video at the Rational National today about how CNN did something similar where they tried to suggest that Bernie was the one holding up the stimulus package. That Bernie was the one that was going to hurt the economy because he wanted to ensure that working class people didn't die and starve in a COVID heap. Right? Like, just... yeah. Like, honestly, guys, like, it's really bad. Like, I know, like, other things are happening and, like, the primary's over and stuff, but, like, the way Bernie has been covered with regard to the stimulus has been really bad. Like, really, it's been awful. I don't know, like, I don't know how else to put it. It's been really bad. Like, these people don't get it. There's both a moral and an economic argument for stimulus. Now, some economists that are like capitalist aligned will try to downplay the value, but there's real economic value. First, Ilhan Omar was right. This is a survival thing as well. Like, people are going to die if they don't get more help. Literally. If Bernie isn't listened to here, people will die. Like, you don't want to make that argument in politics because it makes it look like you're trying to hold the debate hostage by calling your opponent a murderer or whatever. Because, like, you know, why, like, if you don't support me, you're killing babies or whatever. Like, it's often a bad argument. But what else can you say if you're not supporting basic stimulus for, like, right? Like, I don't know. People are gonna die, guys. And somehow Bernie's the bad guy? Cause he wants people to get aid? And so, like, I don't know. It really bothers me. And I think it also has to be said again, like, and Josh Hawley gets this. He's a Republican. Well, it's both, Jojo Kitty. It's both relief and stimulus. It's both. Like, it's a relief payment because working class people are suffering and dying and getting evicted and all these sorts of things. But it's also stimulus. Because when you help the most vulnerable, that generally gives buoyancy and stability to an economy. An economy does not run on luxury yachts and candlesticks alone. An economy needs the broad masses of working and middle class and poor people to be able to afford the things they need and at least a few of the things that give them little pleasures in life. Right? Like, that's what people learned out of the Great Depression. That's what Keynesianism is, in a sense. Right? And I'm not even, like, I'm to the left of Keynesianism. But the basic argument is, like, when working class people, whether it's a combination of social programs, good labor standards, strong unions, redistributive taxation, and like a balance of all of these things, you create an economy where the working class has what they need for the most part. And so therefore, they can stimulate local and regional and national economies. Whereas, yes, when wealthy people have a lot of money, they still have stimulative effects as well. But it's much more isolated and sporadic. Right? Like, if you own a restaurant that caters to working class people, or if you own a grocery store or a convenience store, giving money to working class people will have a much more consistent benefit for you than giving it all to the rich and wealthy and well-connected. Right? So, fundamentally, like, that's what we're seeing here. That's what we're seeing here. And like Nathan, like, they're waiting for a handout. People aren't waiting for a handout, man. COVID kills you. So one, there's the reality that you want workers to go back and sacrifice themselves to the line god, to the S&P or to the Dow or to the NASDAQ or whatever. But like, the reality is that like, one of the reasons why COVID disinformation and COVID lunacy is so big is because both parties, but the Republicans more so, have been so fucking obstinate on getting aid to people. If you made sure every American got $2,000 a month throughout the early days of this pandemic, there would have been way, way, way fewer COVID truthers and protesters. What the Republicans did was create this scenario, corporate Democrats too, but the Republicans, again, almost unanimously, was create a situation where we're giving people inadequate amounts of money to survive, and then we're closing down businesses. And so, of course, those people are going to say COVID must be fake because otherwise the horror would set in. Because the alternative is our politicians are trying to murder us in a cow-like slaughter, like a slaughterhouse. And a lot of people would rather believe that COVID isn't real than that. Right? If the United States gave every man, woman, and child a basic amount to survive, they would have been fine. We still have COVID truthers in Canada. We do. But as a proportion of our population, it is significantly lower. Significantly lower in Canada. And it's lower in most developed nations. And in part, that's because we don't have quite the same insanity in some of our media. But also, I think a major factor is people's needs were better. Not taken care of fully. A lot of people were left out in Canada. But on average, people got better aid. Like, right? Like, I don't know. There's stimulative effects and relief effects. People need both. Like, so the argument can be two-pronged. People are literally starving. People are literally on the verge of eviction. People are suffering so much right now, and they need material support immediately. It is relief. It is like life support money. But when you think of small businesses, when you think of local economies, when you think of the general health of the country, there is also a value in giving stimulus directly to people. And I think it's one of the best ways to have a broad stimulus. It's not the only kind of stimulus that you can practice, and it's not the only kind of stimulus that can work, but it is the best kind. Right? That's my view. That's my view. Put money in the hands of working class people, and they will spend it, almost all of it. They'll probably have to survive. Right? Whereas if you give money to businesses, a business may use that money to hire some workers back. A business may use that money to be innovative in this period and create more jobs and more productivity. A business may do that. But a business is probably more likely to just pocket the cash or find some way to get around it. Right? That's where it comes from. Right? Like, that's what's happening. Here in Canada, we have the same issue. Loblaws, our big grocery store chain, we have more than one, but like our biggest grocery store chain, I believe, is Loblaws. National chain. Got subsidies and all these sorts of things. Even before COVID, they got millions of dollars to buy new fridges, supposedly because they were environmentally friendly. Just massive giveaways to an immensely profitable corporation owned by like Canada's second richest family or whatever, right? Like, crazy. And so for part of COVID, these companies, they raised their wages of their workers by $2 an hour. But they stopped that like in the summer. And COVID keeps getting worse. It's getting worse in the US, it's getting worse in Canada. And they cut the hero pay, and they're still paying out dividends. Many companies in Canada have not only continued to pay their dividends, but they've increased their dividends. They've increased the amount of money they pay out to their shareholders, which means these companies are not hurting for money. Companies that are hurting, if anything, cut dividends. They lower their dividend. They say, we pay out this and many cents per share. We're going to cut that by 1 cent per share. Because we don't have the money right now to pay out a full dividend. When you increase dividends, that's because the company's doing well, or at least doing okay. The problem with that, Nathan, is people aren't looking for a handout. In many cases, people do not have jobs to go back to. Not in all cases, but in many cases. And again, I remind you, the Republican strategy here is they want handouts for corporations. They want to give working class people sweet fuck all. And when those workers go back to work, they want those corporations to have zero legal liability regarding COVID. So who in the fuck is getting a handout, Nathan? Who's getting a handout? It seems to me like the corporations are getting a handout. Not the workers. Not the working class. The workers are getting a hand from the... And they're getting tossed into the furnace. They're getting grabbed by the hand and hip-tossed into the furnace. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. The corporations, and frankly, this it includes some small businesses. I'm not a small business romanticist. They are going to have workers starving and desperate. Many of them still won't be able to get jobs because not all the jobs are back yet. But let's say like you can get a job, you go back to work, your boss is negligent about safety protocols, you get COVID, you die or you get sick or whatever, you have no recourse. None. At all. We're not talking about a situation where your employer makes a good faith effort to like protect you. We're not talking about that. And like mistakes happen and accidents happen. Right? We're talking about a scenario where they are 100% protected from this. 100% protected from any liability. Meaning a corporation has no reason to make their workplace safe. Yeah. Betty's Mush says, put her into a restaurant, talking about Stephanie Rule. Sorry it took so long to read this, Betty's Mush. Into a restaurant with AOC, even being nice would have an impact on her hard work. Yeah, I mean, like, I think a lot of these people certainly have a disconnect from the way a lot of regular folks live day to day. Like, I think that's a big issue with a lot of very wealthy people. I don't know if they get a sense for how the regular person lives. And, you know, AOC, of course, now is a congresswoman, so she's not necessarily a regular person in that sense. She has a working class origin, but she is very much not a working class person in terms of her material conditions right now. But, you know, more people like that in Congress is good because they do have that pulse. The thing, Nathan, is employers in general have a responsibility to provide a safe workplace. Generally. And so to say to corporations, you do not have to have any sort of protection is absurd. Again, I'm not saying that a company that puts up all of the safety installations and allows non-essential workers to work from home and implements social distancing in the workplace should be sued because by happenstance, one of their workers gets COVID. The point is, Republicans and even some Democrats, corporate Democrats, want full legal liability shields for corporations. And so what that means is companies don't just have to, you know, be perfect in stopping COVID, which again is probably impossible. It is. But then they have an incentive and they have the backing of the US government to not take care of their workers. Right? It's not about them being responsible for the entirety of the pandemic. It's like Tyson Foods having their managers place bets on how many of their workers are going to die from COVID as they pack in working class people into chicken processing plants where they all infect one another because they're standing in close quarters. Under this regulation, companies would be allowed to purposely murder their workers with COVID and face no legal consequences. None. I'm not exaggerating that. They could literally cough in the faces of their workers and face no consequences. Why would? Full liability shield. That is not reasonable. In OSHA, like you said, Nathan, you're familiar. OSHA is not a, companies are always 1,000% absolutely responsible for everything that happens. And even if a freak thing happens, they're going to lose their business. But companies where accidents do happen and it was found that, they were negligent, or a worker gets hurt and it's because, there was an OSHA inspection last year and they made a recommendation to fix something and it wasn't fixed, they might pay fines. They might be sued. These sorts of things. It's an issue. It's a real issue. And I don't think it's responsible to deal with it as that's happening. The liability is for civil liability, yes, but fundamentally, though, the liability is still going to protect people. Maybe my coughing in the face was hyperbolic, but only to a degree. If you know that packing your workers in will lead to them getting COVID, and you could have made it safer, but chose not to because you put profit ahead of safety, then you are killing workers. A couple things here. Craig asks, do you have any thoughts on how to disentangle our economy from the stock market? Right now, so much of retirement is dependent on investment returns through both pension funds and private investments. I mean, that's a great question. That's actually something I've thought about a lot, Craig. So Craig is basically saying is, whether it's through Social Security or the Canada Pension Plan, or you have a workplace pension, or you own 401ks or RSPs or whatever, in essence, a lot of your retirement is connected to the stock market. You might not own shares in companies. You might not be a day trader. You might not be like a retail investor. But if you own like a general mutual fund, then yeah, a lot of the economy is tied up in those things. I mean, I'm not sure what the exact answer is. I think one thing to look at is I do support the general like Mitterrand plans that Sweden explored in the 1970s and 80s, which was a gradual transition to worker ownership of large corporations, where gradually worker funds would be set up, where the company would insert a certain value of the company to eventually have it so that the workers controlled a sizable portion of the company. That would be one thing I would look at. But I mean, I don't know what the answer is to like the totalization of mutual fund capitalism, because it really is a massive web, and I don't know, and that's not me saying that there's no answer. Certainly like do a little bit of research here, but like that is me saying that like it's not going to be easy, and I don't have an answer to that disentanglement. Yeah, Betty's Mush is saying that 17 states want to help overturn the election. That is kind of interesting what we're seeing right now. I mean, I don't actually think it's going to lead to a literal civil war, right? I don't think it's we're literally going to get to a civil war, but it is to say that there is something very odd happening here. Like, so the latest news from Trump's legal failures, because almost all of his cases have failed, is that Texas, or at least the Attorney General of Texas, is filing a suit and basically saying that because these states, without any evidence, because these states did something wrong, all these swing states, and because the presidential election affects all of us, we have the right to intervene to enforce the rules of those states, even though very clearly election law determination is on the state level. And so Texas filed that, and then they were joined by at least 17 other states. I don't know if it's Texas plus 17 or if it's Texas plus 16, but basically 17, 18 states are involved right now in this lawsuit that's maybe going to go to the Supreme Court. Now, because it's a state suing another state, it doesn't have to go through like circuit levels, but the Supreme Court, I don't believe, has to hear it, and I don't think it's likely to succeed. But it is to show that basically you have 16, 17, 18 states lining up right now to try and overturn the vote in 3 or 4 particular swing states. And I've never seen anything like it. It really is this like, it is like this like, at least in a legal sense, like a legal civil war within the United States. Right? Samurai Jack says, Christo Aivalis, why don't you talk about Marxist theory on your show? I mean, it's something I want to do more of. It's about finding a balance between like what people want to watch, what I want to talk about, and what I feel comfortable talking about. You know, I'm at least reasonably well versed in Marxist theory, like through my education, but I'm not like an expert on theory. And so that's one of my reluctances, is to directly speak on it. But, you know, it's something that I could certainly look into. It's just, you build audiences, and my expectation is much of my audience might not watch a video of me speaking about Marxist theory. And so it's about things I have to look at. Is that something that I should make a regular occurrence? Is that something where I make it part of a stream? If I was to start a second YouTube channel, would it include, say, things that are still about politics, but not necessarily about electoral politics? So talking about theory, talking about bigger questions like constitutions and things like that, maybe. But, you know, it's also about just trying to find the time to do all of these things. I mean, until recently, Trudeau is not a communist, guys. Trudeau is a center-right neoliberal. Like, really, he's a center-right neoliberal. You know, same thing with Joe Biden. But if anything, Trudeau on some issues is to the right of Biden. On others, he's to the left. But on like fracking, he's to the left. He's to the right of Joe Biden. Trudeau is way more pro-fracking than Joe Biden is. And on pipelines, especially. Trudeau is way more pro oil pipelines and tar sand fuel. But it's about one of those things. I'd have to look into it. But it's like, until recently, like my son was fully out of daycare. I barely had time throughout the whole summer and until really mid-October to do anything. Right? Like, it's one of those things, right? Like I didn't have a whole lot of time to do a whole lot of writing. Right? Or writing or any other videos but what I was doing. And so, you know, we'll have to see, like, you know, if COVID spikes again, my son might have to come out of daycare and I'll have to kind of reduce my load again. And so it's hard for me to make like any sort of like definitive commitments right now to like the work I'm doing. Whether it's more videos on the channel or different kinds of videos or videos that require much more intensive editing and effort and scripting potentially. These are things I can't commit to right now. And so these are things that I have to look at. Hey, Zoltar the Magnificent. Great to see ya. Hope you're doing well. So it's something that I'm interested in, but it's like I'd really have to think of, how I would do it. How I would fit it in my schedule and things like that. Like one thing, for instance, I was able to do a little bit more, given that my son went back to daycare, was do writing. So as I noted, I wrote a piece for Jacobin that went up last week, and I want to do more writing and stuff. And so it's also about which content works best for which medium. Like some of the things I want to talk about, I feel work better as like a 1,200 word article than as a YouTube video, right? And I like to find the best way to cover certain stories. Some stories do not work well on YouTube, I find, but they do work well on paper, and vice versa. Okay, so one more thing I want to talk about, and I do have a video on it, and I think this is great news. I want to close out on something that's pretty fun, but Nina Turner, guys, is running for president. Now, I am going to say this without any basis of fact, but, Nina likely saw my video that I just posted in the description earlier today, and likely decided to run. Of course, I'm kidding. But over the last few days, there's been a rumor that Nina Turner, who was one of Bernie Sanders' most... I'm not a pro-Biden channel. I hate Joe Biden. Nathan, if you go check... So I know you're heading out, but if you go look at some of my most popular videos of all time, it's me calling out Joe Biden's cognitive decline. It's me calling out Joe Biden's racism. It's me calling out Joe Biden's neoliberalism. A lot of my other top videos are indeed also me doing the same for Trump. I have not shied away from criticizing Joe Biden. I just happen to think he's a little bit less bad than Donald Trump. But again, I've never told my viewers even to vote for Joe Biden. I suggested that if I were in the United States, I would have. But I do not begrudge anybody who voted third party. I did say don't vote for Donald Trump, though, because I do think Donald Trump is a monster. But that's my position. So Nina, yeah. So Nina, Craig, she is running for Congress. Yeah, Nina's not running for president. So Nina Turner was Bernie Sanders, one of his chief surrogates, spokespeople, organizers on his campaign back in 2016 as well. And a lot of people wanted her to be Bernie's VP. I don't know if that was really going to be in the cards, but they wanted her to be his VP, or they maybe wanted her to run for president in 2024 when it became clear that maybe Bernie wasn't going to win this time. And I always thought that would be very interesting, but her limitation was limited electoral experience because she was an Ohio state senator, but only for one term. She has never been reelected to a major office, right? And so Nina Turner, in that sense, that was the one thing she was missing, was like being a congresswoman at like the national level, winning elections, defending elections. Like that's what made her like something that say even like AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib all have now. They've won a Congress election and they've defended their seat. And so I was like, always for me personally, I was like, Nina should look to run for Congress. And she didn't run this time around, and I get it. She was working on Bernie's campaign, and by the time Bernie's campaign ended, it was likely too late to run for Congress. And so this time she got a little bit fortunate that in her home state of Ohio, where she was a state senator, Marcia Fudge is leaving the Congress most likely because Joe Biden is appointing her to cabinet. He's going to put her in cabinet, and if she gets confirmed, of course it's not guaranteed, but if she gets confirmed to cabinet, she'll have to give up her Congress seat. And that means that there will be a special election held for Nina's potential seat in the House of Representatives. Oh yeah, Doug, I'm not trying to suggest that she wasn't, but I'm trying to think of like what would be her on paper weaknesses and like how do we get rid of those weaknesses? And I think that's the one big glaring issue, right? That she was only ever going to be seen as like a Bernie campaign person. But if she runs and wins for Congress, then she will like still be part of the Bernie movement, but kind of carve out her own specific path. You know? Like, so I think that her running here is great. Now, this is one of these districts that's hyper blue. So if you look, it's the 11th district in Ohio. So the 11th district of Ohio is currently, let me see. The 11th district is mostly, Ohio districts are crazy gerrymandered, but it's mostly like a Cleveland down to Akron district. It's been created like that probably to pack in a lot of Democratic voters because Ohio's a gerrymandered state. But the district is very blue. It's D plus 32, and it's a majority black district. Black people form about 53% of the district. White people about 39%. Hispanics about 4.5%. And it has been Democratic since 1983 and heavily Democratic. And so Marcia Fudge has been there since 2008, and she has always heavily won. So, for instance, in 2016, excuse me, let me see. Where is it? In 2018, she won. Where's that amount? Yeah. She won the district by 82 to 17. 82 to 17 or 18%. What they've done in Ohio is they've really packed the districts. There are 16 districts, 12 of which are controlled by the Republicans, even though the Democrats get about 47% of the vote. So the Democrats get almost half the vote, but only a quarter of the seats in the state, because the Democratic districts are all heavily, heavily packed. The Democrats win their 4 districts 60 to 39, 82 to 17, 67 to 32, and 74 to 26. That was in 2018. And so basically, what you're seeing is that this is one of those districts that Nina can run in. And if she wins the primary, she's going to she's gonna win the seat. So that's what we're looking at here. So Nina needs to find, a hybrid movement. She needs to build capacity in that part of Ohio, but she also needs to tap into the national Bernie movement, because donations, phone banking, all those sorts of things, Nina is going to get national help in a way that most primary challengers wouldn't get. And so I do think she has a very good chance. She has a very good chance. Right? I mean, Nina's not perfect. I mean, I have disagreements. Nina used to support charter schools. I don't think she's perfect, but I think she would be a good addition to Congress. Nina isn't perfect. I feel she was too soft on John Kasich when she had him on his podcast. I don't think Nina is necessarily as consistently strong on progressive issues as, say, Ilhan Omar, who I think is just the best. I love Ilhan. But I think Nina Turner, when you look at that Congress of 435 congressional people, I can think of 400 of them, 420 of them, 430 of them that are worse than Nina Turner. So it's not that she's perfect, it's that she's good, and she's probably better than whoever the neoliberals are going to put up. So I think it's going to be big. She's going to raise a ton of money, guys. She's going to raise a ton of money. And there's certain advantages here. Depending on when this special election happens, if there's not a national thing to pull in the moderates, who are all going to be at brunch because Biden won, there's a real chance that Bernie supporters that are not going back to brunch are going to be hyper-organized for her, whereas neoliberals are not going to really, put the full effort in. And so I think that, it would be harder for her to, say, run a primary challenge during a general election where attention is divided, where it's like you're focused on all these other primaries and Bernie's running for president. And so you really want the down ballot races to go well, but you're also, looking at Bernie. Whereas like a midterm progressive challenge, you feel you can have a greater impact. So I think that, look, even Ilhan's not perfect, guys. Look, my point is, Nina's good. She's not great all the time on every issue. Again, her position on charter schools, which she held not all that long ago, is unacceptable. Now, people can change their mind and things like that, but that, to me, is awful. She was a supporter of charter schools. Charter schools should not exist. They should be banned 100%. Every school should be public schools. I'm actually a believer that private schools shouldn't exist, especially non-religious private schools. Religious private schools shouldn't exist either, but they'd probably be unconstitutional to ban. I don't think you should be able to charge tuition for K-12 education, personally. But that's I don't want to get off topic. The point is, she'd be good. And I do think she has a real chance of winning. Now, again, the Democratic Party will organize against her. 100%. They're 100% going to organize against her. But she is going to have a national movement. And I don't know if any of the other people they would put up against her are going to have a national movement. I think she's got a great chance. Yeah, Samantha, that's a good point. They might try to make that argument against her that she didn't fall in line. She also said that, Biden is better than Trump, but voting for Biden is like eating half a bowl of shit, and voting for Trump is like eating the full bowl of it, which I think is actually I get her point. I made a video on that and I agreed with her. But I could see some of those things hurting her because maybe her district has a lot of people that are loyal Democrats, and you have to convince those people that you're both challenging the Democratic Party, but also that you're trying to maybe improve it. And it is going to be really hard. That's going to be a challenge. And that's a really good point, Samantha, that that's going to be a challenge. But again, in terms of primaries are largely about organization and resources and managing those things effectively. One challenge Nina might have is if she can't convert the national movement to a local one. And I'm not saying she can't. That might be one challenge. But because of the pandemic, I don't know when this election's going to happen, but because of the pandemic, online distance campaigning might play a bigger role than normal. And then Nina has a very big advantage Because again, no one has the movement like she does. Right? Like lots of people are already saying like, look, I'm going to campaign for you. I'm going to phone bank till my ears bleed. Like, I'm going to donate as much money as I can. Like, I want you to win. And other people aren't going to have that. But if this becomes a local on the ground race, then if they run, say, like a local small businessman that's got deep roots in the community, she might have a difficult time. And then like national issues start to matter. Like, look, Elliot Engel, or Jamal Bowman, when he beat Engel, I mean, yeah, he got a lot of national help towards the end, but it was really local organizing that won it for him. AOC, it was local organizing. Like, local organizing is what helps. Now, maybe Nina will do it through a national movement, but like if you look at the people that have done it, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, AOC, who knocked off big name Democrats, they did it through local on the ground organizing. I mean, they're going to definitely try to stop her. 100%. 100% they're going to try to stop her. But we'll see. They try. I am Canadian, Crazy Monsoon. You pegged me. But look, they tried really hard to stop other progressives too. And, you know, you can't stop them all. You can stop some, but you can't stop them all. And so, look, I would need to see the list of all the candidates, how accomplished they are, how much name recognition they have, what's their level of popularity in that district in particular. Like, are they like prominent within the Democratic Party in Ohio? You know, these sorts of things that I just don't know yet. And so that's something we have to really look at. So guys, I think I'm going to wrap it right now. A few things before I go. One, be sure, if you want like a more focused breakdown of that, please be sure to check out the video I made on it. I did make a video on this topic. I'll drop a link in the description. So I encourage you to go watch that after this video is done. Another thing is to check out the Discord. The Discord is a great place to chat with other people who like the channel and kind of have discussions in between the streams. Another thing is to check me out on Twitter. Twitter is where I do a lot of my, just kind of posting about my videos, but also, there are a lot of things I comment on that maybe aren't, enough for a video or are unrelated to some of the videos I make. And so that's a good thing to check out as well. And so, that's, yes, as we may know, subscribe to the channel. If you're new to the channel, please click subscribe. It helps to grow the channel and spread the message of, progressive values and progressive content. Also, be sure to click the bell if you haven't yet. And one of the big things you can do to support the channel, of course, you can support it via Patreon if you have the ability and the means right now, which I know for a lot of people this time of year with COVID, people don't have a lot of extra money, but if you do, you could support the channel on Patreon. But the biggest thing, guys, honestly, especially as the election's winding down and like a lot of like casual viewers go away, one of the biggest things you can do to support the channel is just watch the videos. If you can like make a habit once a day of just watching the videos, playing them even, it really helps a lot of progressive channels. And like really, like it sounds cynical, but it's like a numbers game, right? So when you play a video on YouTube and you play it the whole way through, YouTube likes that and shows it to more people. Maybe casual subscribers I have that don't watch all my videos will be more likely to have it recommended, but it might show it to new people. So frankly, the best thing you can do is when I put a video out, if you want to support the channel, just watch it. Like, and it costs you nothing. So guys, this was great. This was fantastic. For those new, again, I do these every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Usually go to about 10. But I have videos out pretty much every day on the channel, often multiple. So I will see you guys tomorrow with another video. And if you want to reach out, send me a note on Twitter. And I hope to see some of the new folks on the Discord. Guys, have a good one. Thanks so much.